we'll go ahead and get started with our last roundtable of the day, right? And I think going into TechMission, I had no idea how the day would go, right? It was kind of a new idea in general, something that we haven't done before, and something that it's just trying to feel out, how productive can we be during this conversation. So I feel like we've brought a ton of value today from the panelists. We've had just some incredible panelists, and our final panel of the day is no exception, right? We wanted to bring together some industry leaders in terms of just talking big picture stuff, right? And more industry specific type stuff rather than just shop specific stuff. So for this panel, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel, and I'll let you guys each kind of introduce yourselves. But the first thing I think of is just how much of a honor it is to have all of you guys on here, right? It's a pretty talented panel. We've got some representation from independent shops, from dealerships, and including our own Mark Wilson from Finder Wrench and WrenchWay there. So Mark, with that, I'll let you kind of kick things off with introducing yourself, if you would.
Yeah, like Jay said, I'm Mark Wilson. I work with Jay to run Finder Wrench and WrenchWay here. We kind of ran it as a partnership. I think maybe we flipped a coin or someone lost a bet over drinks one night on who would be CEO and president, but we definitely run it as a partnership, and I'm excited for the conversation, but enjoying them all throughout the day. So kudos to Jay, you, and everyone else.
Thank you. Bryan, would you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Definitely. Good afternoon, everyone. Bryan Stasch, Vice President at ATI, in charge of content and program development, and I am honored to be here and part of this panel.
We're honored to have you, Bryan. I appreciate it. Joe, you want to go ahead next?
Yeah, Joe McDonald. I'm a Vice President of Sales for Jasper Engines and Transmissions. I've been with Jasper for 24 years. We're an employee-owned company, and excited about being a part of this industry talk as well.
We're always happy to have you, Joe. I've learned a lot from you, and really look forward to hearing what you have to say about this session. So, James, go ahead if you get a chance here.
Yeah, I did it. Got my video up. Thank you for your patience. I'm James Monroe. I am the Customer Services Operations Manager for Toyota in the Chicago region. So there's 13 more of me around the country between Toyota and Lexus. I've been with the company about 29 years, all on the fixed side. So a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having us.
So you're just getting your feet wet then, James, right? Just starting to get going there?
Yeah.
All right, so I want to get initial reaction on what happened today, right? And what we heard from technicians, from managers, from the tech schools. I thought it was really interesting to hear what the tech schools had to say, right? Is there anything that stuck out to you guys, or a panel maybe that stuck out to you that you look at and you say, this added some value, or maybe it changed the way I saw something? And I'll open this up to anybody. Joe, you look like you might want to talk.
Yeah, I mean, somebody said it earlier, there's a lot to uncover here. And, you went from the technician, tech school, and employer, right? And that's where the problems occur. And there's breaks in between. What we're seeing out there is, the tech school sometimes has got that reputation of not putting out the type of tech that the shop needs. But at the same time, the tech schools are saying, hey, we need some training involved in the aftermarket and in the dealerships to help us train these techs the right way. And everybody's at the table right now. It's creating those platforms and processes to streamline that. We need the tech schools, and it was awesome representation who you had on that panel today, and leaders in the industry, and they're ready to make this happen. So I think everybody heard what they needed to hear. Next steps are going to be, what do we do about it, and how do we fix that disconnect?
I agree. And Bryan, maybe I'll go to you next, but do you see opportunities for us to put some of this stuff in action, right? We talked about a lot over the course of the day, but and you guys with ATI and what you're doing for, coaching and really, my dad's a client of you guys. Like, is there a an opportunity to not just talk about it, but to actually do stuff?
Oh gosh, yes. And the bad thing from our perspective, and I wish I'd have had the opportunity to see more of this earlier. I'll teach in a couple of classes, shop owners most of the day. But the tech training schools, they are not what they used to be, not as available as they used to be. And Joe had talked about the UTIs and stuff like that. The cost of this and what they produce on the end. As an independent, we don't have the luxury of some, like factory training. But we are just huge believers in growing our own, and we always have been. There is a particular point where we're going to rely on professionals for the upper training on the hybrids, the electrics. We work with our members on a tech training curriculum to get a young technician to a general service tech, a C tech, a B tech into an A tech, just to be able to get them productive and get them in a position where they can produce for the shop, produce for themselves, earn a living. But like I said, what we did for our independents, the independent and aftermarket, we have a tech training curriculum we designed that a technician or a shop with a senior technician can mentor young technicians, apprentices, if you will. And Bryan just has some serious issues. Of course, I got issues, but what happened to apprentice programs in our industry?
Yeah.
We don't. Last I saw them in the independent world was into the late 80s max. Don't see much of that. So we are huge advocates of mentoring, in-house training to grow our own technicians, but then it's time to turn them over to the true professionals with the hybrids and the electrics and some of the factory training stuff. So that's what we've done for the aftermarket side, and we've always been big believers in that one. So.
Yeah. James, any takeaways from today, or from, in just general discussions that we've had, opportunities for us to take ideas and turn them into actions?
Yeah, I think, we're in a tough spot, and, the industry that I look at today is certainly not the industry that I started in, as far as technician recruitment and the amount of schools and vocational programs that were out there. It seems like we lost something, in the last few years that we need to gain back. And one of the things that I think about a lot is, a lot of our dealers, might react and say that some of these kids coming out of the schools that do exist, aren't ready to go. And I don't know that that's really the school's fault. I mean, I think the lack of funding on that side of things in the trades, in whether it be high schools or vocational schools, et cetera, I think has fallen off. And I don't think they have the up-to-date curriculum that they need. And we do our best with our T10 schools, but I think we really need to work with the education side of it to maybe provide some more generic, curriculum that's updated to today's technology. So when these students, come out of school, they know what the systems and components are on a 2021 Camry, and at the same time, I think we can do a better job at providing components for their labs that they can tinker around with and learn about, and even cars in that sense. We are doing, in the last couple of years, we've started a program with any vocational school. We'll provide them access to our technical information system, as well as our entire maintenance e-module program. So they can use that TIS, we call it, of course, as a tool to educate with. And those technicians, when they come out, are basically maintenance certified to go into a Toyota dealership. And, for that matter, maintenance certified to go into any dealership or shop for that matter. So we're excited about that. Our strategy now is to get our dealers, which, I heard you talking about with the educators. It's really getting our dealers to build the relationships with their local schools. I think that is such a key.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I thought that was great. A great discussion to have coming out of that tech school roundtable. Mark, I drugged you into this crazy industry, kicking and screaming. What were your kind of, I guess, thoughts on today, right? Like what, we kind of pieced a lot of stuff together. We went over a lot of stuff, but be interested to hear kind of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I'm newer to the industry than everyone, certainly in this panel, but probably everyone listening today. My impressions, we didn't know what to expect. We got a lot more signups than we were planning, which is great. I come away impressed, not just today, but in my short time working with folks in the industry, impressed with the willingness to communicate, to listen, to want to improve, to admit there's problems. Like I said in my product overview, it's not all doom and gloom. There are a lot of happy people and a lot of good things going on, but I'm impressed with just how everyone wants to improve it and listen to the other side. I think from our standpoint in putting this together, we've talked, Jay, you and I talked over the break a little bit we didn't really know what to expect on this first one, so we kind of cast a wide net. We're excited going forward to, instead of going wide, to go deeper into individual topics. So maybe one whole half a day will be on one specific topic, things like that, where I'm anxious to dive into these areas deeper. We're just restricted a little on time. That's no fault of what today was. But it's just super exciting to hear the technicians, like they're passionate about what they're doing, but they also see a need for improvement, and to see the managers admit that as well. I just think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then not even touching on the school stuff, I think there's a lot there. The one comment I'll make as an outsider is if you're new coming out of school, I started my career as a CPA. I thought I knew everything. I passed the CPA right away. I got high scores on that. Look at me, how smart I thought I was. You go into the job and you realize you don't know that much. I think that's going to be true in any industry. You can pass the school part of it, and they prepared me very well to go into my role, but I needed actual experience, and I'm sure that's true here as well. So I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where it's just someone comes out of school ready to go and turn them loose with no supervision at all. But again, that's kind of my outsider view. I wasn't as surprised to hear that sometimes maybe people don't think they're as prepared as they should be, but again, that's maybe my more outsider perspective.
Yeah, I think that's good insight, Mark. And to the panel, I want to talk about the technician shortage in general, right? And it's obviously a pain point, and really why I think the conversations we're having today were so popular in terms of really hitting home with a lot of people. I want to start with understanding if there are opportunities to bring people, non-traditional people, into this industry, right? And when I talk about that, maybe women or minorities or, whoever that might be, where we haven't been maybe exploring those opportunities as much. But Bryan, you work with shops all over the country. Is there opportunity there to bring some non-traditional people into our workforce?
Oh my, yes. And whether it is a female or a minority, technicians are technicians. It really doesn't matter, but there's a ton of opportunity. And there's, of course, a big stigma about ladies in this industry, which is a bunch of not good stuff. But over my career, I've managed a couple lady technicians, and well, it's pretty darn good. So that opportunity is out there every day, whether it's the independent aftermarket or whether a dealership perspectives.
Joe, from the standpoint of industry involvement in what our responsibility is in doing that, do you see something at a greater level than just the shop level that we need to be doing to help the shops out and really kind of look at those non-traditional bases that we can pull in? Is there a responsibility from us outside of operating an actual shop to help get more people into the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. We take that very seriously. Obviously, when you look at bringing people from outside the industry, and it was mentioned earlier today, always be recruiting. We feel the same way. It's all about finding the right person that's going to fit into that shop culture, if you will, company culture, if you will. We all know what that bad seed will do to a shop, to a company. And that's the biggest mistake we see out there, as many shop owners keeping somebody longer than they should because of fear of losing them, losing productivity and whatever else that's going to cost the shop. But always be recruiting. and then bringing them in and then training them, especially where we've seen a lot of success in this across the country is in that service manager, service writer role. We're seeing service writers come in from outside the industry being sent to an ATI or another training on service writers and coming in and doing very, very well. It's a people business. You're dealing with the public and you find that right person on that front desk, it can change everything. No different with the technician. You find a good person that's got those skills, you can bring them in and train them. So I do think we take a lot of responsibility in that. We're constantly doing roundtables with our shop owners and some other larger events and technician recruitment. And one thing that's not been talked a lot about today is technician retention.
Yeah.
Keep what you have. That's first and foremost what you need to be thinking about, so they're not looking outside those doors for other opportunities. And you want techs banging on your door that, hey, I've heard the shop, you're the shop to work for, and create that atmosphere.
Yeah, you hit on that perfectly, Joe, and it's a great segue to James here with regard to Toyota. I would say from a manufacturer standpoint, one of the more progressive manufacturers in terms of looking at this as a real issue and trying to get people in. But Joe hit it on the head that we can bring as many people as we want into the industry, but if it's not attractive once they get here, we've got a bigger issue, right? Like that is a bigger issue. Do you see, and do you work with the dealerships that are kind of in your network there to talk about that and talk candidly about how do we create a better technician environment so that they're here for the long haul and not just checking out after a year or two?
Yeah, absolutely. When Joe started talking about retention, I was thinking if you called on me, that'd be the first thing I talk about. So we certainly have, a lot of good dealers out there across the country. There's a lot of good dealers out there that don't have a technician hiring problem because they take such good care of their workforce. But we have, as a company, and it's a little different, as you go around the country regionally, but our focus has been one of our focuses has been attacking this from the root cause, and that's retention. And so, without getting into a ton of detail, we've been talking to our dealers a lot for about 2 years here in our region about really kind of the umbrella is associate engagement. Parlaying that customer satisfaction will never exceed employee satisfaction. So one of the elements that we're working on with them is the recruiting and hiring piece of it, and providing them resources, talking to them about where to look, where to go. There's companies out there that, such as yours, that provide some tools to do that. So you got to hire the right people in the first place. They got to be a good cultural fit for your store, or your dealership. And I think someone mentioned that earlier. You don't want to hire somebody in that's going to, upset the apple cart and everybody in it. So once they're hired, career path is super important. Onboarding is super important, and I'm just kind of repeating bits and pieces of what everybody else has already talked about. But then, another element to it is recognition, and I think recognition is a big piece of it, and we're working with the dealers on that as well. Even if it's a walk through in the shop by the general manager or the owner of the business, once a week, twice a week, whatever it is, getting to know people, getting to know their families. Letting them know you appreciate what they're doing, and if they had a good month last month or whatever it may be. But yeah, we're certainly attacking it from that standpoint and trying to educate the dealers. Really, if you really look at the workforce out there, us Gen Xers and Boomers, we're fine with flat rate and working long hours and all that stuff. We're used to it. But the new generations are not. They are the ones whose baseball games we missed because we were working late. And the most important thing to them is quality of life, quality of the relationships at work, all that stuff. So we definitely need to attack it from that side of things.
Yeah, Bryan, did you have something you wanted to add there?
I did. I just something that we've been working on with the independents, of course, and we've been feeling the pain of a technician shortage. either young ones coming in or losing them on the other end. Get tired of the flat rate, jump to municipalities, trucking, busing, and stuff like that. Not in their world. But we've worked very hard the last couple years on employee engagement and designing a culture. And you picked on that, James, as far as us Gen Xers and baby boom. They were never focused on that. They were focused on that top-down management mentality. That does not work with this younger generation of workforce. Now they just want to sabotage us. But we've worked very hard and really had to with owners, with employee engagement. And it really starts with finding out how engaged their employees are. We have a program set up that the surveys get done. And it is really, for the owner of that shop, it can be pretty painful to see how their team feels about how their people get treated. So we've worked very hard on that. And it's only been a short amount of time, but we've watched this needle starting to move with finding some of the younger ones because of the right culture, because of demonstrating a career path, demonstrating a timeline by when I will be trained. So most of the stuff James and Joe just hit on, perfect, right there.
Yeah. So Mark, what do you see? I mean, you've had a chance to really get a good grasp and talk to a lot of shops. What are you seeing out of the best when it comes to culture, or when it comes to, you know, how they treat their people, and what do they do differently than maybe what a shop that doesn't have as much success is doing?
Yeah, and I think this is stuff that's true in all industries. I think first and foremost, you have to have a strategy. You can't just expect it to happen on its own. Some things will that you can't control, but you can guide most things, and you need to hold all levels of employees accountable to that strategy. Survey after survey, as far as Bryan mentioned employee engagement, but employee engagement, employee satisfaction, loyalty, whatever they're kind of measuring, one of the top factors that always comes up is your relationship and how your direct supervisor treats you. So you could have the best ownership in the world and they walk through the shop and that's great. But if their direct boss is, I mean, just an ass, to put it bluntly, and nothing ever happens or changes with that, those are the people that are going to leave. Those are the people that pay might have got them in the door, but they're not sticking around for a little better pay or a little better benefits. So I see, if I had to summarize it, I'd say it's having that strategy, but make sure it's followed through all the way through at all levels, but specifically that direct supervisor level. I think that's the most important in any job, any industry, is kind of how your direct boss treats you, and does he or she look out for your career development for all aspects. That'd be my number one takeaway from talking to people.
Great point, Mark.
Yep. So one of the things that is always a really, really hot button topic, and just kind of expanding upon the conversation that we're already having here, is pay, right? And technician pay. And there's such a almost venomous argument between hourly and flat rate, and really understanding, you know, what goes into that in understanding that. One thing that I loved that Bryan mentioned on our manager roundtable is that he offers variable plans based on what the driver of the individual is. And I thought that was just a brilliant idea. But I guess, Joe, maybe I'll start with you on this one. When we have our issues when it comes to pay, and when we're talking to techs, is there a one-size-fits-all plan for everybody, for every shop? Or is it kind of, you know, is it changing and adapting to what the shop's goals are, what the technician's goals are? You see a lot of shops out there. What do you think in that regard?
So again, James nailed it. You know, Gen Xer, you look at the average age of a shop owner, and again, I'm in the aftermarket, independent repair shops. I think James would agree. Most service managers are, you know, 40, 50 years old. You got to work a little ways to get up to that. And their perception of how you pay a tech is how they came up into the industry. And it's just not what's happening today. I listened to Bryan as well, and you've got to understand your technician and what their needs are. I feel, you know, flat rate is definitely out there, but you've got to offer, whether it's hourly or salary, with incentives. If you're on flat rate, you're basically on commission. You're a sales rep on commission. hey, hon, what do you think going to bring home this week? We had this, furnace go out. I don't know. I'll let you know tomorrow morning, Monday, when I get in there and see how many cars are there. So that's just not going to do it for the younger generation today. They need to know what they're bringing home. So we have to have that flexibility in the shops to get those folks into your shop. And again, most importantly, to retain them. I want to mention something else too. We talked a lot about culture in that last piece. That's the first thing I say to a shop owner who's struggling. You have to decide what the culture of your shop's going to be. You got to decide it, and you got to stick with it. You're going to lose some dinosaurs. You're going to lose some maybe people that have been here for 10 years. But as soon as you sway from that, you're never going to have the shop that you want to have, that you dream of having, and you're always going to have problems every day. That's the business we're in. But until you commit to that and stick to that, print processes out, have them sign them, hold people accountable, it's just not going to work. So I just want to reemphasize that again. But on the pay piece, it's got to be based on the technician and his needs, and on this younger generation, they've got to understand what they're going to bring home.
Bryan, it looked like you wanted to add to that too. Like, do you as far as tech plans where a shop's not going to go broke, but then it also keeps a tech happy? Is there a kind of a balance there?
There's not an exact science, I will tell you that, from somebody who's been doing tech and service advisor comp plans for 20 years. We do believe, and as Joe was saying, all techs have their own different personalities. Not everybody is motivated by money. You truly got to find out what's going on inside of someone and help build a compensation or a performance compensation plan around that. And one thing we definitely have watched over the last several years, yes, this younger generation of workforce, they're not going to jump into flat rate, because most of us grew up working on minimum wage versus flat rate, minimum wage versus a percentage of your sales. Nowadays, the new minimum wage, of course, is $15 an hour. And yeah, you need to be able to be flexible in compensation plans. Not everybody's motivated by money. What is most important to that individual? So I think these gentlemen already pretty much said what I wanted to say.
Yeah, well, that's good. And James, maybe some level of the dealership side of things. What do you see from your dealerships in that regard? Is it just one base plan for everybody, or do you see some level of adaptation to that?
Yeah, somebody in the Technician Roundtable yesterday mentioned something that I'll mention first, and that is that it's a little bit different. I mean, the dealer side of things in an automotive dealership, the investment is, I think, typically a lot higher than it is maybe in an independent shop, unless it's a really big independent shop. So the stomach they have for getting rid of flat rate is not as strong, let's say, or it's going to take a little more convincing. But I guess overall the majority still flat rate. I mean, we do have certainly dealers have in their express teams typically hourly. And then, some dealers out there certainly have shop foremans or some senior guys where they're paying salary, et cetera, maybe even hourly with bonus or whatever. But we're really, for the first time, and I think it used to be kind of taboo to talk to our dealers about pay plans, but we're talking to them about them. We're talking to them about flat rate, and we're sharing stats, from the NADA survey, which is their organization, that says 21% of your technicians are happy with flat rate. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So, but I think the other thing that makes sense to me too is what we're talking about here in the diversity of pay plans in a dealership as well, because everybody's not the same, right? There's 25% of automotive techs, dealership automotive techs, again, a survey stat. Those guys are happy with flat rate, but they're the experienced guys. They've been around a while. They know exactly what to do. And they know how many hours they can turn each week, and they know what their paycheck's going to be each week. So not a problem with them, and they'll probably, continue doing that until they're, maybe they get a little arthritic and plead for some salary or something at the end of their careers. But, again, coming up, there's the flat rate system, antiquated for sure. One thing I'd like to just, put out there is all the risk is on the technician, right? So if there's not enough business coming in the door, dealer doesn't have to pay him, right? It's his risk. And when you're talking about young folks just getting into the industry, or even guys and gals that have been here a while, but maybe they're not as productive, or in that case. But they're taking a lot of risk, and so when you look at making a living, again, that 25%, they budget around what they make every week. They know what they're going to make every week. The rest of them, they can't budget. Again, if it's slow, they're not going to make the paycheck that they need. And, if they get stuck working 10 hours on a 2-hour job, there goes the week, there goes the paycheck, there goes the ability to pay your bills and support your family. So it's a huge issue. We do have, and we just did a actually survey in our region alone, and we do have probably 25% of our dealers have some technicians on some hybrid pay plans. So we're encouraged by that, but we still need, we got a long ways to go to convince them that there needs to be some consistency and some security in what their employees make every week.
I love that, James. That's great insight. And Mark, you go ahead. Feel free to add.
Yeah, just real quick, and to add on to that, Jay, you hear me say this a lot. Of sometimes I've talked to shops, and I would caution against letting the exception become the rule. So Jay, you had made the comment of the shop going broke, or earlier in the day it was mentioned about we can't plan for COVID. Of course we can't, but you shouldn't create or design your compensation plan around those things that rarely, if ever, happen. I would challenge most shops that if they are 100% flat rate, so this maybe is the accountant in me, but look back at the last year, 2 years, and see if you would have had a guarantee, how many times would they really have not met that number of hours, where if you could give that certainty to your employees that you have enough data to know realistically, they're probably where you can come up with what that guarantee is in a number that you're not risking that much. Once or twice a year, you might be. If it's more than that, you have probably other problems with your business where you're just not bringing in enough customers. But I would look at the numbers and kind of eliminate that fear a little bit of, if I have a guarantee with an incentive, what if we don't have any hours? How often does that really happen? But giving that level of certainty to your employees just helps them so much. And we see it on the recruiting side all the time, that they want to know what they could make, of course, at the top end, but what is the kind of guaranteed or base amount going to be? That's so important for them in managing their household budgets and things like that. And I really don't think that part of it is going to cost shops anything extra. It's just taking the time to look through, their salary and their hours and compare that over the last 12 months might not be the best example, but in normal times, what that would be. Does that make sense, Jay?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really, really good way to look at that. And even looking at the last 12 months, right? Like, I think they probably still wouldn't have paid out that as much as, like, maybe you worry about it going into a pandemic of, are we risking all of this? But just having the security blanket as a technician to know that I can feed my family, and I'm not going to have to do like Joe said and say, how much money are we going to have in the account to be able to go, do whatever there is, or, be able to pay the bills. Do we see one thing that was interesting, and it was brought up in the Technician Roundtable, was the desire to learn more about the business aspect of it, or the financial aspect of budgeting. Do we see areas where we might be able to educate a technician on different areas of finance that aren't rocket science, right, but are very, very impactful? One of the things that I see from a core level of a young tech coming into the industry is they strap themselves with debt right off the bat, right? Where they're buying a toolbox, they're paying for their education in a lot of cases. And not only are they buying that toolbox, they're buying a Snap-on toolbox or a Mac toolbox that they're spending way over their means, and especially when they're coming in. And I've seen it a lot of times where a person comes in, they buy that box, they buy that fancy box, those fancy tools, and they're out of the industry 2 years later because they just didn't make it work. Joe, do you, I mean, is there value in trying to educate some of our younger people, and even honestly, some of the veteran techs that are spending half their paycheck on tools, maybe that they need for one job or something like that, to really take some of that strain off, the budgetary strain that we kind of put on them by having to buy their own tools?
Yeah, I see this, you know, when you start talking about budget, we're also talking about transparency in the shop, you know, from a bigger picture here. You know, we look at that technician and the day he's seen the owner pull up in that new truck and he's busting his butt and his knuckles, and look at that guy, he's spending all the money we're earning for him, and not sharing anything with that technician. So I'll mention something, I'll bring it full circle specifically to the personal financial piece. But, and I think I shared this with you, been doing this 24 years. I've gone in and out of thousands of shops in every part of this country. And if I could sum up one thing, I can walk into a shop and feel the tension right away, right? And then you walk in those shops where it's just comfortable. And one of the biggest things in the shops where it's comfortable is it's transparent in there. They break bread together at least once a week. They all sit down, lunch is on Wednesday, everybody stays here, we're gonna eat. But the biggest thing is the owner is sharing the numbers. He's sharing what our sales numbers are, what our profit was, right? He doesn't have to get in and dig in and do net profits and what he's taking home. But overall, so the technician understands, hey, we had a good month. And they're proud of me. You know, I turned all these hours and now we're all going to get a bonus at the end of the quarter because we hit the sales number. Be more transparent to the technician. They want to know what's involved. In the technician roundtable, they talked a lot about that, understanding, being part of it. Many of them feel, hey, I need to be promoted to service manager to have a better understanding of what's going on in business. No, you should understand what's going on in business, being a technician, if it's transparent and truly understanding what's going on there. In that, I think it brings personal financial responsibility of understanding where the numbers are and why we had to buy this piece of equipment, and we're not going to get bonuses, but we reinvested in our business. It's just like you reinvested in those tools for your business to make money long term. So I think, you know, that can go a long way. Some of your best shop owners, operations managers in the dealerships, they're bringing those speakers in, and that's giving back to your associates. You know, one gentleman talked about financial coaching coming in and teaching those guys. That's going to affect them personally, and that's going to make them more loyal to their employer as well. So we're a big proponent of that, and we offer some things across the country for our shops for them to plug into certain things that we're plugged into. So 100% behind that.
Brian, it looks like you want to add something there.
You know, exactly what Joe just said, but another component I might add to that is, how does a technician or how does an advisor really play and move that needle? And
yes,
you know what I do for a living, profitability. That's what I do for a living. And I am hardcore about working with owners or talking. Your people need to understand. And we see it sometimes with service advisors' faces when they come out of a class here and we talk about how do you build a labor rate? Where does a labor rate come from? When they see the cost of being in business, the cost behind the benefit load, that really does have some impact, because honestly, not too many people in our industry understand that, yes, what you cut out of my check, FICA, food, and SUDA, owner's got to double that. They don't really understand that. So hallelujah, Joe.
Yeah.
Numbers, and how does each role play their piece? How do they move that needle?
Yep. One of the best meetings that I've ever been involved with was a shop in South Carolina, and the general manager of that shop came in and he was worried that people were stealing from him, right? And they were taking tools from the shop. They were, you know, and there was something that we talked about earlier today was kind of that distrust between management and techs. And there was a lot of that going on in this building. And he did one of the smartest things from a meeting standpoint that I've seen, which was he had a whiteboard in their conference room. They walked in and there was a number written down on there. And it was a big number with a dollar sign in front of it, right? And what he was doing was sharing with them what their monthly expenses are as a shop. And so when it went down, when it got to the point of, like, you guys are complaining about all this stuff, and I can't even put into words how well he spoke to this, but he talked about, guys, this is what we have to hit every month in sales to break even. if we don't hit this, we're not making any money. And not only that, there go your raises, there goes your bonus. Like and as you're taking and removing stuff from the shop, that's having a negative impact on that bottom line, and our expenses go up. And it results in you not getting your piece of the pie because there's not any pie to give out, right? And James, maybe I'll ask you too, with that side of it. Do you think there's opportunities for us to better educate techs on the business side?
I think there absolutely is, and again, some dealers are probably really good at it already, and share that transparency of what's going on with expenses and profitability, and help them understand what their contribution is to that, for sure. And I do think that's their responsibility. I don't think it's our responsibility as a manufacturer, but we're always as part of our partnership, we are always doing whatever we can to help them in that respect. So but I think there's plenty of resources out there, either internally within the dealership if you got somebody qualified to do so, or externally to provide that education to folks. The other piece of that, I think you also have to take it, and this goes into the associate engagement piece, is you have to take it down a level too. So you talk to them about the big picture and maybe what the shop's expenses are and how many hours they need to turn to be profitable. But then, you need to bring folks in, on a monthly, quarterly basis, and, provide them or set goals with them on what their contribution to that is. Track those goals, bring them in, talk to them about how they did, against those goals, hold them accountable if they're not meeting, expectations. And I think that, also gets them knowledgeable about what's going on and why this place exists, So,
Mark, I think you should add on there, because I know that's something that goes directly into your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about two different things, one on the personal finance and then the other kind of sharing numbers about the shop. Both are important. I agree with what everyone else has said. On the shop side, I think more transparency is always better, but even if you don't want to share all those numbers with your employees, the example earlier in the day was kind of what you bill the customer that rate and what the tech ends up getting paid per job or per hour. Understanding that difference, you can share a lot of information with that without sharing the whole P&L if you don't want to. But I mean, technicians are humans just like anyone else. If they understand where that goes to, they're going to be more realistic about it and not have as many gripes, because if they honestly think that markup is just going straight to the owner's profit, I'd be mad too. I'd be expecting more money. So understanding that's hugely important. The one comment I'd make on the personal finance side is not every shop can afford to bring in speakers and things like that. But if you work a little harder, I think you can. The internet's a great thing. There's a lot of free resources out there. You can watch videos, do that as a team, and then kind of pause them and talk about it amongst yourself. Every town has, I mean, Jay's brother is this, he does our company 401k plan. There's a million of those guys that would be willing to come in and talk to your shop. You're not looking for some Harvard level economics speech or anything like that. There's guys in every town that would gladly come in and speak to the employees and help with that. And I think it just helps bring people together too. So I think that's a no-brainer. And sometimes you see smaller shops use it as an excuse that they can't afford to bring in these speakers. I think that is exactly that, just an excuse. And it doesn't take a lot of research to find a local guy that can come in and speak to that. It looks like James might have had another comment.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah, everybody speaks and it makes us all think about, something else. And one of the things that I was, when I was reading this question, this morning that I thought of was, kind of the parallel, it's a little bit off, but if you look at the NFL, right, as far as personal finance goes, they come into the NFL, young players out of college, and I think they are bombarded with, financial planners and help in figuring out what to do with, all of a sudden they're, got $100,000 check in front of them or whatever it may be. And I think that education is coming from, it's probably coming from the team owners, the NFL, and maybe even in that case, the union But, what about, our trade organizations? What about NADA? What about, I don't know, ASE is kind of probably too technical, but NADA maybe providing that resource, for their members, their dealers, for the dealers associates. I think that's an avenue that we could look down.
That's a great point, James. I mean, that's what those associations are really for too, right? Is to drive some of that, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to do that. Bryan, did you want to add anything on to that?
No, he did well.
All right. So a topic that I want to discuss is labor rates, and maybe the pressure on labor rates as we are starting to see our skilled labor is starting to go up in price, right? Or they're starting to command a greater salary, which is really what we're talking about today. Where do we see labor rates going from a shop standpoint in the immediate future, medium future, maybe even long-term future? I do feel like we've had incremental gains on labor rate, but we've never really had a huge jump, in my opinion. And it really, I don't know, in order to pay a tech more, you're obviously going to have to make more money as a shop, right? So Bryan, I'm going to start with you here. What do you see from a labor rate standpoint of the pressures on labor rates? And you're dealing with profitability every day, so you get to see it. But do you see any level of pressure on those labor rates to go up?
Yes. Not only the cost of the technician to be able to perform that work, but the tools and the equipment and all the information access the shop's going to need to be able to deliver that product. So, and we would build a door rate based off of the cost of our most expensive technician. And right now, and I just did this drill a couple of weeks ago, I was running a report, and of all of our members, we got about 1,700 of them. Average labor rate's about $1.21 across the country. And it's going up. But what we would focus on more is the balance of production and someone to offset that cost. We're not big believers every shop needs an ATEC or a bunch of ATECs. One or two, less than half. But having a technician at a little bit lesser cost as they're growing or going, with a balance in production to help bring our overall costs down, to try to minimize the immediate need for that. But it's going up, and it's going to be going up every year, not only because of the skill, because it's a white collar education that the guys are fixing cars these days. But I don't need a shop full of them. There's still a lot of B skilled work and C skilled work. Just having the right balance of pay and the right balance of production, minimize the immediate need for that. But yeah, it's going up.
James, do you see something similar on the dealership side?
Yeah, I mean, I would, I would say that our dealers' labor rates are going up for sure. Part of that I think is, to Bryan's point, is the mix of technicians. I mean, we're fortunate that even though we do have a turnover problem for sure, it's at the lower end. At the higher end, we've got a lot of senior folks in our dealerships and really top heavy, especially. I was over on the Lexus side for a few years, especially at Lexus. So, that cost of labor is pretty high for those dealers. And so there's certainly a need to continue to raise those rates in order to, pay your bills, I guess. You got to be careful. I mean, they still have to be competitive. And I think if you look at the door rates that are rising, I don't know that their effective labor rates are rising at the same rate because they still need to be competitive. So I think most of the time that they're getting that rate is certainly the heavy repair work. But when you're talking about maintenance, I don't think that the cost there, the labor rate there hasn't gone up, that much at all. So.
Joe, do you see maybe a kind of an awkward position it puts the shops in with rapidly increasing salaries as compared to, maybe not as rapidly increasing labor rates?
Yeah, I do. And you called on the right person first, and that's Bryan. I was hoping you weren't calling me. That subject matter, it can get you in trouble. There's 100 different ideas and thoughts on labor rates and how to determine them and what you're doing. You know, what I've typically shared, you've got to be competitive in your marketplace, and you have to know your numbers. You know, Bryan mentioned earlier how to build up to that labor rate and all those different calculations. I'm not an expert on that, but you've got to understand it. Some of these guys are just coming up with labor rates just to come up with them, and different labor rates for different type of work, you know, goes into that as well. But it does get, it's a tough subject to have with a shop owner. I'll typically ask, when is the last time you changed a labor rate? And if it's 5-6 years ago, you know, we talk, you know, you've got to stay on top of that. And if you're going to attract the right technician, you got to be able to pay them. And there's got to be that balance there. So you've got to be charging the rates. Now you're seeing, it's no different than this division in shops, and the ones that are charging the higher labor rates and attracting a certain demographic and clientele, they're going to get that. And you've got some others in different markets that are struggling to get that. So they can't get those labor rates, and they've got to make some other decisions within the shops to create that profit margin where it needs to be. So some of these guys are in a pretty difficult situation when it comes to that.
Mark, I'm going to kind of pick on you a little bit here because of your background with M&A and that kind of stuff. But do you, when you're seeing this kind of the need for shops to raise labor rates, or at least be able to keep up with the inflation that we're seeing on the wages side, do you see any, I guess maybe other industries that have a similar problem? And I know this is kind of a vague question, but like where the salaries are raising, they seem to be like skyrocketing, where maybe the actual end product of what you're selling isn't able to go up as fast?
I can't think of any industries off the top of my head, but I do think everything can boil down to kind of what Joe was talking about, is knowing what the competition's charging, knowing your market. All markets are different. I don't know that I would agree that all areas, what you pay the techs is going up either. I think we see a lot of areas where that probably isn't true, but on the whole, I would agree that it is. So no, I don't have any direct comparisons, but I guess maybe the challenge question I'd throw out there is, if the cost of metal or some parts or something like that went up, you would have to pass that along. Or eat it. It should be the same decision in your head that you go through for your techs. Just because they're human doesn't mean you like, well, we can just pay them less. Whereas it's a part that goes up and you can't do anything about it. I would look at it in that same regard of, I might be able to get away with paying that person less than market rate for a little while, but they're not stupid. They're going to move on. They're going to go somewhere else. It's just a short-term thing. You got to face it eventually. If anything, I think you should give more credence to the fact that they are humans and need to support their family, compared to if the price of parts or something like that increases. But I think it should be a similar decision. And I think sometimes we naturally just look at it as, you know, I can play with that number a little more than I can play with just the direct cost I have to a vendor for a part. And I don't know if that's 100% right or wrong. I just think it's interesting that we don't think of those in the same way.
Go ahead, James. I thought that was great.
Yeah, so I think there's two camps out there. When you talk about, and you're right, labor rates are, Joe, a touchy subject and to talk about for sure, because there's just so many aspects of it. But I think there's a couple camps out of there, and if I could collect my thoughts here. You know, as far as automotive businesses go, dealers, independents, you name it, there's business philosophies on volume, meaning as much, you know, gross profit in dollars that you can bring into the business, or bringing more gross profit, or maintaining a gross profit per transaction, right? So I think depending on what philosophy you have is what you're doing with your labor rate, right? If you want to have if you don't need or want the volume, but you want to make the same profit, then you're going to raise your rate. If you want, you know, to increase your business and increase the number of people coming into your store, then you can probably keep your rate in a more competitive place and just bring more volume in. And, you know, those being equal, they make, you know, about the same.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Just gets. I think that's a fair point, James, and it gets down to your business plan in general for your specific the specific business. And I like that you call out that strategy ahead of time, because I think it's really, really smart. I'm going to shift. We're running up on our time here, believe it or not, which is just crazy to me. This day has just flown by. And I apologize that we've gotten so wide instead of deep, like we talked about, but I think it really allows opportunities for us to dive even further into other subjects as we keep going. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that. The topic I want to close on, and this is something that I had thought about over the course of the day, but I see it quite often in terms of whether it's through a forum or it's through a just general chat, is there a need for a general certification or a general, you have to pass this test to get in to be a tech? And the reason I bring that up is I see varied opinions about this everywhere, right? And Tanner brought it up in the initial tech roundtable this morning, and talking about how Canada does it a little bit differently than we do, right? Where they've got like an apprenticeship type system where you kind of similar to what some other skilled trades are. Is there something, is there value in extending that conversation beyond just that would be nice to have, or is there actual value in coming up with some type of universally owned system that you take this test, you're qualified? And I think it's a little bit of a loaded question because we kind of have it with ASE, but I don't think it's embraced by the entire industry as much as it used to be. Bryan, maybe, I don't know if you want to add something to that or talk about it, or even if it's worth talking about.
I think it's worth talking about. Others might disagree with me, but I am definitely a believer that I wish all technicians had to be licensed and had to be certified. I'm a big believer, and that would raise the credibility of our industry. Not easy to do, of course, and some states have licensing, others don't. But I'm a believer in the industry as a whole. Should.
Joe, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this comes into play from the credibility of the industry. A lot of the complaints that those of us that are in the industry, especially technicians, shop owners, customers come in and can't understand why it costs so much, and they have no idea what I'm paying for this equipment and the diagnostic equipment I need today. And that's still the biggest gap, biggest issue that we have. The consumer just doesn't understand the investment in that shop, in equipment, and in that technician. So ASC, it just hasn't jumped that gap to the consumer to where, hey, I'm looking for a shop that's got an ASC sticker on it. That was the goal. Unfortunately, it did not happen. You look at other industries, you know, your technician comes to my house and he's a journeyman. I don't know. Okay, that sounds
right.
Pretty cool, but I don't know what that means. Okay, now in the union journeyman, that's a big deal in that industry. I trust the owner. So if the owner says, hey, I'm sending this guy, I trust them. Same thing with the shop owner. You know, if you look at loyalty, it's in the small shops, it's loyalty to that shop owner, and they trust what they're doing. I agree. I wish we could have something like that to create that credibility and up the level of what the consumer realizes the cost of that business is. We're just so far away from that. I don't know what the answer, truly the answer is. And if we did come up with something, it would take years, right, to get that in the consumer's mind that, hey, when I take my car in, that's a specialized deal. You know, you look at the transmission industry, you know, years ago, most shop owners, they wouldn't touch that transmission because it was a specialized product. They took it down to the local transmission shop and let him do it. Now that's changed somewhat today because a lot of it's just R&R. People aren't rebuilding them like they used to. But your AMCOs and different things like that, they made that effort to the end user, to the consumer, to make that specialized, and it's worked somewhat. You know, you see AMCO with the commercial, and they show that transmission and it blows out. It's got 1,000 different parts. You know, I've heard shop owners will say, hey, why aren't you doing any transmissions with us? And they say, I just don't get a lot of them. And I've heard many stories where their loyal customers were using the local transmission shop when they had a transmission issue because they didn't even think that he could do that. So transmission industry's done it, and some other ones have. That's the biggest piece. And if a certification could do that for us, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and I think it's a general education side of shops educating their customers. James, you don't have that problem as much on the dealership side. I think, especially with Toyota and the T10 program and some of the stuff that Toyota does, I think you're kind of on the cutting edge of that side of it. But do you see any value in just an industry embraced kind of certification, or does it not bring as much value to a dealership?
Yeah, I think we do have issues. You know, when you guys have been talking about this topic, I'm just thinking service quality, and I'm thinking safety, right? So, do you want somebody that hasn't been through some type of certification working on your brakes, or working on your airbags, or any of those things? And I don't think people would. So, I guess, and I don't know if this is Toyota's opinion, but it's my opinion. I think there needs to be some type of education, certification, and you're right. Our program, our training program, is pretty comprehensive. We're one of the few manufacturers that still requires a corresponding ASE with our courses, which we think is important. Not that the ASE is Toyota specific, but it shows aptitude to be able to think through things and take a test and pass the test. And so, also certainly when we talk about our recall work, we assign minimum levels of certification to that recall work, depending upon what it is. So I think it's important. I don't know. I'm with everybody else. I don't know how you'd ever do it, but
yeah.
I really like maybe I don't think you could do it as an industry. You can certainly do it, as a shop, as far as mentorship and bringing people along the right way. But nationally, I don't think you could do it.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Mark, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
Not a ton, just kind of what James ended on, that it would be a challenge. Of course, I think it would make it better if there was something perfect. Like Joe said, it would take forever. It doesn't mean people smarter than me shouldn't be working on that. I hope they are, and I hope it is happening. But what you can control right now, I think earlier Tim from VIP, they do an awesome job of kind of laying out their own program of the different levels. It does a number of things for them. It helps when they're hiring people to know exactly what to expect. A lot of the technician feedback we hear is they want more career development and knowing how to advance. So even though part of what Tim does tie to ASE certifications, but they also create their own kind of metrics. So yeah, I wish we had that thing at the top industry level, but I think shops can do a better job of creating their own, call them certifications, call them milestones, call them whatever you want, but something to lay out to those technicians on how they can advance, how they earn more money. That, and then if they're smart, they turn that around, and they should be sharing that publicly to get more consumers in the door, to let them understand how many hoops and how many levels the technicians go through, and they can confidently know when they drop their vehicle off, it's being worked on by a pro. I think all of that would work well. I'm a big incremental change guy and kind of try to fix what I can control. So I would start with that at my own shop if I owned one. But like I said, I hope people smarter than me are working on a little more uniform certification that we could all benefit from.
All right, guys, we're up on our hour. We're actually over our hour. So I want to say thank you to all of you for really taking the time to talk about this. Again, this is more of a high-level overview of the industry and talking through some things that we went really broad on, but hopefully we can bring you guys back at some point for a more in-depth discussion to dive into one of these topics and really get into the meat of it. I think that's one thing that we learned today, is that we really want to dive into a few of these topics really deep. So hopefully this starts the conversation for a lot of people, and hopefully we can start to see some change, right? And not everything's bad, but there's definitely areas that we can improve as an industry, and I think you guys are all leading kind of the charge on that. So thank you guys so much for participating today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay. Good work today on everything.
Our pleasure.
Appreciate being a part of it.
Cheers, guys. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody that stuck with us over the course of the day. That was a long day that felt like it took 10 minutes. So you guys, all the comments to the chat and the Q&As, I couldn't have asked for a better day. So thank you to everybody. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. Hope you learned something. And for those of you on the diesel side too, we'll see you tomorrow. We're doing it all over again. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.